The wind was cold, sharper than usual, and it carried with it the smell of war, blood, steel, and burning wood. Jon Snow stood at the edge of the camp, his black cloak fluttering behind him, eyes fixed on the stars above. He had returned from beyond the wall, with news no one in the south would believe. The dead were marching, the Night's Watch was losing, and no one, not even his brother, was ready to listen. Robb Stark, king in the north, was winning battles across Westeros. Men called him the Young Wolf. They sang songs of his victories. But while he chased glory and revenge for their father's death, Jon had seen something worse than Lannisters and Freys. He had seen the White Walkers. Jon rode into Robb's war camp under the dark of night, dressed in the black of the Watch, a symbol of his oath. Robb welcomed him with a strong hug and a smile that reminded Jon of their childhood. For a moment he felt safe. He forgot the cold of the wall, the screams of dying brothers, and the blue eyes of the dead. "You came," Robb said, clapping his hand on Jon's shoulder. "I had to," Jon replied quietly. "We need to talk alone." Inside the king's tent, the brothers sat by the fire. Grey Wind, Robb's direwolf, growled low but rested at Robb's feet. Jon told him everything about Craster's Keep, the White Walkers, the Whites, and the thinning defenses of the wall. How Castle Black was barely holding. How if the wall fell, the entire realm would burn. Robb's face turned from warmth to concern, then to disbelief. "You want me to abandon the war?" he said. "Turn my back on the north? On Winterfell? On Mother?" "I want you to help," Jon said, his voice trembling. "The Night's Watch is the only thing standing between the living and the dead." Robb leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "I can't. We're close to victory, Jon. We've come too far. I have men depending on me, families hoping for justice. Justice won't matter if we're all dead," Jon said sharply. "You've always listened to me." "Please, Robb, this time." "Believe me," but Robb didn't. He ordered Jon to return to the wall, to do his duty while he continued fighting in the south. Jon left the tent broken and angry. That night he stood by the horses, hands shaking. He knew what had to be done. The Night's Watch was dying, and the living were too blind to see. Robb wouldn't give him men willingly, so Jon would take them. He had seen the loyalty Robb inspired. If he could deliver Robb's army to the north, to the wall, they might survive. But it would be betrayal, a deep one. It meant stealing from the brother who had always loved him, Jon whispered to Ghost, who appeared silently beside him. "I never thought it would come to this." The plan was simple. Break into the war camp's armory, poison the food supply just enough to slow the soldiers, then lead a group of black brothers to take command in the confusion. With luck, they could turn the army north without killing too many men. But plans always go wrong in war. As dawn broke, the camp was already in chaos. Men were coughing, vomiting, collapsing by the dozens. Robb stormed out of his tent, sword in hand, demanding answers. Jon stood by the stables, his face calm, but his heart torn in half. "I'm sorry," he whispered as he mounted his horse. Robb saw him and shouted, "Jon, what have you done?" But Jon didn't stop. He rode north, with 100 stolen men behind him and 1,000 regrets inside his chest. He hadn't just betrayed a king, he had betrayed his brother, but in his heart, Jon believed it was the only way to save the realm. The sun barely rose that morning. The sky above looked as if it shared Robb Stark's anger, dark, stormy, and full of fire. His once loyal brother, Jon Snow, had vanished before dawn with 100 men, enough supplies to feed a small army, and Robb's trust shattered like broken ice on stone. He stood in the center of the chaos, watching his soldiers groan in pain, clutching their stomachs and coughing up blood. Whatever Jon had used, poison or herbs, it wasn't meant to kill, just weaken. But to Robb, it felt like a knife in the back. His own brother had turned on him in the middle of a war. "Your Grace," said Lord Karstark, arriving breathless. "The Night's Watch men fled north with your horses, and I know what they did," Robb said coldly. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, his knuckles white with fury. "Find out who helped them. Someone in this camp opened the gates. I want names." But as the hours passed, Robb's anger started twisting into something worse, confusion, even guilt. He thought back to their talk the night before. Jon had begged him, He had looked at Robb with desperation in his eyes, the kind of fear no soldier carried unless he'd seen true horror. What if John was right? What if the threat beyond the wall was real? Even so, betrayal was betrayal, and Robb was a king. Kings could not forgive traitors, even if they shared the same blood. Far to the north, John rode like a man possessed. The men who followed him, mostly young soldiers, tired of war, unsure of the politics but loyal to the black, didn't ask questions. They trusted Jon Snow. He had that strange pull, the kind that made men believe they were doing something greater than themselves. Still, Jon barely spoke a word. His thoughts were heavy with regret. Every hoofbeat sounded like guilt pounding in his ears. He had stolen from his brother, dishonored his name, broken his oath to both family and friend. But he had also seen things no man should see. The White Walkers, whites that didn't bleed, corpses that kept walking, a baby offered to darkness. If he didn't bring help, the wall would fall. And if the wall fell, no war in the south would matter. Winter wouldn't come, death would. As night fell again, they camped near a frozen stream. Jon stood alone, feeding ghost bits of dried meat while the men talked quietly by the fires. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. "You betrayed your own blood, and still think you're the hero?" Jon turned fast, his hand on Longclaw's hilt. But it wasn't a threat. It was Samwell Tarly, pale-faced and breathing hard from his ride. "Sam," Jon said, shocked. "What are you doing here?" "I rode south to find help." "But I found something worse," Sam said, stepping closer. "Robb Stark has sent riders after you, dozens. They say you're a traitor, that you're to be executed on sight." Jon closed his eyes, nodding slowly. "I knew it would come to that. But that's not the worst," Sam said, voice trembling. "Castle Black was attacked 2 nights ago. The dead reached the gate. We fought them off, but barely. Half our men are gone. The wall won't hold another week, Jon." Jon stared into the fire. The heat on his face felt like punishment. He looked around at the sleeping soldiers he had taken, none of them trained to fight the dead. These were boys and tired men. They didn't know what was coming. And now they were hunted by the very army they had once served. "I thought I was buying us time," Jon muttered. "All I did was shorten it." Sam stepped forward. "You did what you had to do. But you're running out of options. If Robb catches you, it's over." "I know," Jon said, voice low. "That's why I won't let him catch me." The next morning, Jon led the men off the road. They would travel through the Wolfswood, taking hidden paths, avoiding villages. He needed to reach the wall before Robb's riders found them, before Castle Black fell. But Robb Stark was not far behind. He had sent his best scouts, fast riders who knew Jon's habits, who knew how he thought. And one of them had already found the camp's fire, still warm, as Robb held a burnt piece of wood in his hand. He muttered, "You're making me chase you like a criminal." Jon, beside him, Grey Wind sniffed the ground, growled, and began to run. Robb followed, and for the first time, he didn't know if he wanted to save Jon or kill him. The forest was thick with frost, the trees groaning under the weight of early snow. Jon led his group through the Wolfswood in silence, the sound of crunching leaves and the occasional snap of a branch, the only reminder that they were still among the living. He rode at the front, Ghost by his side, eyes scanning the path ahead. He could feel it. Robb was near. Sam kept up the pace, but barely. His breath came out in white clouds, his cheeks flushed red from the cold. "Jon," he gasped, "if they catch us, they won't talk. They'll just draw their swords." Jon didn't answer. He knew Sam was right. Robb would not give him a second chance. Not after what he'd done. Behind him the men, the deserters, the loyal watchmen, the uncertain soldiers Jon had stolen, were tired, hungry, and starting to whisper. Some had already begun to wonder aloud if this mission was cursed. If Jon Snow had lost his mind. If they had followed the wrong brother. By dusk, they reached an old abandoned watchtower. The roof was broken, and one side had collapsed, but it offered cover. Jon ordered the men to make no fire. "Robb's close," he said. "Smoke will bring his riders faster than a horn." As the men settled in, Jon sat alone on a rock, sharpening Longclaw with slow, even strokes. Every scrape reminded him of the weight he carried. He had not just betrayed Robb. He had dragged good men into a cause they didn't understand. Sam joined him again. "They're afraid, John. Some think maybe you should go to Robb. Explain. Make peace." John looked up, eyes tired and hollow. "You don't make peace with a man you stole an army from." "Then what?" Sam asked. "You just keep running?" "No," John said, setting Longclaw down. "We're not running. We're getting to the wall, and we're going to stand. But if Robb reaches us first?" John didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep down, part of him still hoped Robb would understand, that some bond of brotherhood might survive the betrayal, but that hope died the next morning. The sun had barely risen when the horns blew. Robb's riders had found them. "Mount up," John shouted. "We ride!" Panic spread through the camp like wildfire. Some men grabbed weapons. Others ran into the woods, but there was no time for formation or defense. John barely got into his saddle before he heard the thunder of hooves behind him. He turned to look and saw Grey Wind first, the dire wolf charging ahead of the northern scouts. His eyes locked on Ghost. Then came Robb. He wasn't wearing a crown or armor shining with kingly pride. He was dressed for war, black leather, a stark cloak, and a blade drawn. His face was grim. No anger, no rage, just determination. "Jon Snow," he bellowed. "Stop!" John pulled his horse to a halt, motioned for his men to keep riding. Robb slowed his own steed, just a few feet away now. Grey Wind and Ghost circled each other, tense but not yet fighting. For a moment, the world felt frozen between two breaths. John looked at Robb. He wanted to speak, to say anything, but no words came. "You poisoned my men," Robb said first. "Stole my riders. You left me in the middle of a war." "I warned you," John replied quietly. "I begged you to listen, and you thought betrayal was the way to change my mind? I thought survival was more important than honor." Spoken like a traitor, John's jaw tightened. "And you still think the Lannisters are your biggest threat? That's why you'll lose, Robb." Robb's grip on his sword tightened. "I should take your head right now." "Then do it," John said, stepping down from his horse and tossing Longclaw to the ground. "If that's what you came for, finish it," Ghost snarled. Sam gasped. The men behind Robb shifted uneasily, but Robb didn't move. His eyes were locked on John's, searching for something. Regret, maybe. Fear, or perhaps the boy who used to spar with him in Winterfell's yard, laughing in the snow. "You think this is noble?" Robb asked. "You think dying will make what you did right?" "No," John said. "But I'm not running anymore." A long silence followed. Even the horses seemed to stop breathing. Then Robb spoke, voice lower now. "You have until nightfall. Take your men, go north." "I won't follow you again." John stared, stunned. "Why?" "Because I still believe the boy I grew up with is somewhere in there," Robb said, pointing at John's chest. "Don't make me regret it." With that, Robb turned his horse and rode off, Grey Wind close behind. John picked up Longclaw slowly. Sam stepped forward, confused. "He let you go?" "No," John said. "He gave me one last chance, and John knew, deep down, it would be the last." The wall rose into view like a ghost made of ice, tall, silent, and broken. When John and his men reached the shadow tower, the sky was the color of ash, and the snow had turned red in patches. The ground was scattered with shattered arrows, twisted swords, and pieces of flesh that didn't belong to any man still breathing. Ravens circled above, and the smell of rot clung to the cold like a curse. Sam went pale. "Guards!" John didn't speak. He looked around, his eyes scanning the damage, the burned watch posts, the gaping holes in the wooden palisades. Then he saw them, the dead. Dozens, maybe more. Brothers of the Night's Watch, frozen stiff, eyes wide open. Some with arms raised, like they had tried to fight until their last breath. John dismounted and walked toward the gate. It was half hanging off its hinges, claw marks running deep through the wood. Not animal marks, something worse. He pushed it open slowly and stepped into the courtyard. "Is anyone alive?" he shouted. At first there was silence. Then a voice rasped from the far side. "Jon Snow?" Out from a shadowed corner limped Ed Tollett, dolorous Ed, face bloodied, cloak torn, and dragging one leg. Behind him came 3 more brothers, all half dead themselves. John rushed forward. "Ed, what happened?" "The dead came," Ed said simply, eyes empty. "They broke through the north gate. We tried to hold them. Lost most of the men at first light. Master Elric's dead. Bowen Marsh too." It was chaos. Screaming, burning. They came out of the woods like shadows. Sam stepped forward. "How long ago?" "2 nights, Ed coughed. "If you hadn't come, we wouldn't last another." John's jaw clenched. He looked around at the men he had brought with him. The deserters, the northern soldiers, the few remaining black brothers. They were already tired, unprepared, barely trained for this fight, but they were all that was left. That night, John took command. He split the soldiers into watch teams, ordered the gates repaired, and personally helped dig graves for the dead. They worked in silence, the kind that only falls over men too tired to grieve. Later, as the wind howled across the courtyard, Sam approached John again. "John, what happens if they come again?" John looked toward the forest beyond the wall, where the trees stood like soldiers frozen in prayer. "Then we stand. Or we die standing." But even he wasn't sure anymore. They had barely survived with a full garrison. Now they were patching walls with frozen mud and holding the line with farmers and tired soldiers. The next day brought snow, thick, heavy and fast. It came with screams. John was on the wall walk when he heard the cry. "They're coming! North Gate!" He ran, sword in hand, as the horns blew once, then twice. When he reached the gate, he saw them. First just shadows, then shapes. Dozens. No. Hundreds. The dead, marching again, rising from the woods like the mist itself. Blue eyes glowing, limbs twisted. Faces blank, John shouted down, "Archers, to your posts! Oil on the walls!" The men scrambled, but fear was thick in their blood. They had heard the stories, but stories didn't prepare you for the dead. The first wave slammed into the half-rebuilt gate. John rushed down with Ghost beside him, blade drawn. Sam stayed above with a torch, shaking. The gate groaned, buckled, then burst. The dead poured in. It was madness. Steel clashing, screams, fire. Ghost lunged at the nearest wight, tearing through its neck. John cut down one, then another. Longclaw slicing through frozen flesh. But there were too many. One of the northern soldiers John had brought, a boy named Torma, was dragged down. His screams were short. Another was pulled from the wall and vanished into the swarm. John fought until his arms went numb, until the snow beneath him turned black. Then a horn. Another blast. From the south. At first John thought it was a trick. Then he saw them. Riders. The banners flew in the wind. The direwolf of Stark, Robb, had come. He charged in from the forest line, his sword raised, grey wind leaping ahead of him like death itself. Behind him came 50 mounted soldiers, cutting through the whites like a blade through fog. John's heart jumped. Robb didn't look at him, didn't speak. He just fought, like a storm. Together, they pushed the dead back, until the last one fell with a hiss and silence returned to the snow. When it was over, John stood in the blood and ash, breathing hard. Robb turned to face him. Blood splattered on his armor. "I said I wouldn't follow you again," he said coldly. "But I couldn't let you die alone." John tried to speak, to thank him, but Robb walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the wall. John looked around. The wall still stood, barely, but something had changed. The fight was no longer just for the North. It was for all the living, and the cost had only just begun. The silence after the battle was heavier than the sound of swords. Snow fell gently now, soft flakes covering the bodies of the dead, both men and monsters. Fires flickered weakly along the wall, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. No one cheered. No one celebrated. Survival didn't feel like victory anymore. John stood alone near the shattered gate, his black cloak torn, Longclaw heavy in his hand. His arms ached. Blood ran down his side from a gash he hadn't even felt during the fight. But the pain that stung the most wasn't physical. Robb hadn't spoken a word to him since the battle ended. The camp was tense. The Stark soldiers Robb brought stayed to one side, cold and silent, eyeing the men John had taken. There was no welcome, no reunion, just suspicion. Inside the half-burnt war hall of the Shadow Tower, John sat near the hearth, unarmored and still shivering, when the door swung open. Robb walked in, uninvited, his face unreadable. He didn't sit. He stood there, like a king in judgment. "You cost me half my army," Robb said. John met his eyes. "I know. You poisoned my men. You stole my horses. You lied to my face." "I know," John repeated, quieter this time. Robb took a deep breath, then stepped closer. "And now, you expect thanks because you brought me here just in time to watch my men die fighting your war." "Our war," John corrected. "This fight. It's not mine alone." Robb's fists clenched. "No, but it wasn't your decision to make. You think I wouldn't have come if you'd told me the truth? You didn't even give me the chance." "I did," John said. "You refused to listen." "I refuse to abandon the North," Robb snapped. "I refuse to kneel to fear." "Then look at what your pride nearly cost," John said, rising to his feet. "You saw them. You fought them. Do you still think this is just about the throne?" Robb didn't answer. John stepped forward, voice low and hard. "The wall is falling. The Night's Watch is shattered. You and I, we're not princes and bastards anymore. We're the last men between the living and the dead." The fire crackled in the silence between them. Robb looked away for a moment, jaw tight. Then he spoke, softer now. "When we were boys, I always thought you'd be the one to protect us when Father wasn't around, even if you weren't the heir, even if you weren't one of us by name." John's voice cracked. "I never wanted to betray you." "You didn't just betray me, John," Robb said, turning back. "You broke us." Before John could reply, the door burst open. Sam rushed in, pale and breathless. "There's something you need to see." They followed him to the top of the wall. What waited there made John's blood run colder than the wind. Far in the distance, beyond the tree line, a strange glow burned through the snow, blue, steady, and unnatural. The light pulsed like a heartbeat, and from it the shapes of dead things moved in slow waves. But not just whites, something bigger. "There's more coming," Sam whispered. "And they're not walking, they're riding." Through the spyglass, John could see them. Tall, white figures on skeletal horses, eyes burning with cold fire. The White Walkers, but behind them, something worse. A massive beast of ice and bone lumbered into view, shaped like a giant, its eyes as dead as the rest, dragging a blackened tree trunk as a weapon. Its every step cracked the ground like thunder. Robb stepped back, stunned. "What in the gods' names is that?" "I don't know," John said, "but it's coming." Back in the war hall, they gathered what was left of their leadership. Dolorous Ed, Sam, the Stark captains, even a few wildlings who had fled to the wall after losing their clans to the undead. John stood at the head of the table. This is no longer about defending the wall. It's about holding the line long enough for the rest of the realm to understand what's coming, because if they don't help us, we all die. One of the Stark commanders, a grizzled man named Mors Umber, spoke up. "And who leads this army of broken men?" John hesitated. Robb looked at him, then at the room. "He does." John turned, surprised. Robb nodded once. "He's the only one who saw this war before any of us did. He may be a traitor to my crown, but he's loyal to the living." John's throat tightened. He had expected exile, chains, maybe even a sword. Instead, his brother gave him command. But with that command came a truth John couldn't shake. This war was no longer about kingdoms. It was about survival, and winter had only just begun. They called it the Long Night, but it was worse than the old tales ever described. By dusk, the sky had vanished behind thick clouds and a storm of unnatural snow. The air was too cold to breathe. The wind screamed like the dead, and far beyond, the tree line, the blue fire still pulsed, the heartbeat of the army that was coming. John stood atop the wall beside Robb. Neither of them spoke. There were no more arguments left between them, only understanding. The soldiers below finished reinforcing what little remained of the gates. Oil barrels were set along the inner courtyard. Arrows soaked in pitch were ready to be lit. It all felt small, like holding back a tidal wave with a wooden door. "They'll break through," Robb said finally, watching the horizon. "I know," John replied. "They'll slaughter us. Then we make it hurt. We show them we won't fall quietly." John's voice was calm, but inside he was screaming. This wasn't just a battle, it was the end, and he knew it. At midnight, the horns sounded. 3 long, haunting blasts. They came, not like before. This time, it was organized, calculated. The whites didn't charge in blindly. They surrounded the tower like hunters stalking prey. Then the White Walkers appeared, tall and still, like statues made of frozen death. Behind them lumbered the giant. It swung its blackened tree trunk once, smashing down part of the outer wall. Men screamed, bones cracked, arrows flew, but did nothing. One of the archers dropped his bow and ran. A White Walker impaled him with an icy spear before he'd taken 5 steps. John shouted orders from the wall, voice hoarse. "Archers, aim for the eyes, light the oil!" Flames roared across the field as barrels exploded, setting a line of fire between them and the advancing dead. Some of the whites fell, burning, hissing as their bodies turned to smoke. But most didn't stop. John rushed down the stairs, Ghost by his side. He met Ed near the gate, both of them bloodied, already exhausted. "They've breached the south wall," Ed said. "We're losing ground." John gritted his teeth. "Pull the men back to the inner yard. Make every step cost them." The fighting became chaos. Robb fought like a madman, grey wind tearing through whites beside him. John lost sight of Sam. He saw Moore's Umber take a spear through the chest and still managed to take 2 more whites down before falling. The giant finally made it to the main gate and with a roar slammed his weapon down. The wood shattered, the dead flooded in. John knew it was over. He turned to Ed, shouting through the noise, "If we don't stop that giant, we fall." Ed looked at him, desperate. "With what, John? We have nothing left." And then John made a decision. He turned to the small group of remaining wildlings, hardened warriors, broken families who had fled south when their villages burned. "There's something I didn't tell anyone," John said. "There's black powder, wildfire, hidden in the lower chambers. We were going to use it if the wall ever became overrun. Enough to blow half this tower to the gods." The wildlings stared. "So let's use it," one muttered. John shook his head. "It won't kill them all, not unless we wait until they're inside, deep inside." The silence that followed said everything. "You're talking about sacrificing the tower," Robb said suddenly behind him. "You'll bury every man in it." "I'll bury them to buy the realm another day," John replied. Robb looked at him, hurt and proud at once. "Then you'll die with them." John didn't deny it. Sam appeared from the smoke, coughing, blood on his forehead. "There's no time left." John nodded. He turned to Robb. "Take who you can, ride to Castle Black, rally what's left. You'll need to warn the rest of Westeros." Robb grabbed John's arm. "You said we fight together." "We did," John said. "And now you need to lead what survives." They held each other's gaze for one long final second. Then Robb turned and left. John moved through the tower's tunnels, placing the last of the wildfire. Ed helped. Neither said much. When the giant crashed through the main gate, letting the dead pour inside, John lit the final fuse. He stood at the center of the tower, long claw in hand, as the walls trembled and the air turned to frost. The last thing he saw was a White Walker's eyes, inches away. And then fire. The explosion shook the world. From miles away, the blast lit up the northern sky like a second sunrise, green fire blooming from the top of the Shadow Tower, climbing into the night like the wrath of the gods. The snow burned. The wind howled. The wall cracked with the force. Robb Stark was thrown from his horse by the shockwave. He rolled in the snow, ears ringing, as chunks of ice and debris rained down around him. Soldiers screamed, some deafened, others knocked cold. When he looked up, the tower was gone. Where Jon Snow had stood, there was nothing but flame, rubble, and silence. Robb stumbled to his feet, staring into the wreckage. Grey wind whined beside him. Sam was behind him, pale, shaking, lips moving in a prayer he couldn't finish. They all knew what Jon had done. He had bought them time. A few hours, maybe a day, but the price was his life. Robb clenched his fists, his eyes burning with grief and rage. "Damn you," he whispered. "You were always the better Stark." He dropped to his knees in the snow, surrounded by smoke and falling ash. Around him, the survivors began to gather, what was left of the Night's Watch, the wildlings, his soldiers. Barely 100 men. They had no wall now, no tower, no Jon, only what came next. By the next morning, the fire had died down, but the air still stank of burning bone and green smoke. The snow was black. The ground where the tower once stood was cratered, twisted, and littered with the pieces of the dead. But something wasn't right. Ed Tollett had gone to check the blast site with 2 others. When he returned, his face was pale and his hands were shaking. Robb met him by the wreckage. "There's something you need to see," Ed said. They stepped through the twisted metal and half-melted stone. Bits of burned wood stuck out like spears. The smell of death was thick. But it wasn't just the smell, it was the silence, and then they saw it. A body, or what looked like one, laying in the center of the crater, untouched by fire, pale, still, dressed in the black of the Watch, but covered in frost, Jon Snow. Robb dropped to his knees, stunned. "No, this isn't possible." Jon's eyes were closed. His sword, Longclaw, lay beside him, but his skin wasn't burned. It was frozen. Sam knelt beside him, placing a trembling hand on Jon's chest. "He's cold. Not dead, not alive either," Ed said quietly. "We found him like that, lying where the fire was hottest, but not burned. Like the flames didn't touch him." Robb's voice was raw. "What does that mean?" Sam didn't answer at first. Then he looked up. "I think something saved him, or changed him." That night, as the men camped in the ruins, Sam stayed by Jon's side. He lit no fire, just sat and watched as the frost around Jon's body began to melt, ever so slowly, and then a twitch. Jon's fingers moved. Sam gasped. Then Jon's eyes opened, not blue like the whites, but not the same brown they once were. Something darker, something deeper, like a man who had looked death in the face and been marked by it. Jon sat up slowly, breathing heavy. "Sam," he whispered. "I saw it." "Saw what?" "The Night King in the fire." "Watching me," Sam blinked, heart pounding. "But the Night King is dead, isn't he?" Jon looked at him with hollow eyes. "No, he's still out there, and he knows who I am now." By dawn, Robb entered the tent where Jon rested. The silence between them was thick with unfinished words. Jon looked up, weak but alive. "You came back. You left me no choice," Robb said quietly. "You lit the sky on fire." "I had to." "I know." A pause. "I thought you were dead," Robb said, voice breaking. "I was," Jon replied. "For a moment. Maybe longer." Robb sat beside him. "We can't stay here. We can't hold the wall. The north is broken. And the dead aren't finished." "No," Jon said. "They're not." He looked out toward the dark line of forest where the next shadow would rise. "I saw more than just the Night King. I saw what's coming. And it's worse than we thought." Robb narrowed his eyes. "Then what do we do?" Jon stared into the distance. "We don't fight to hold the wall anymore," he said. "We fight to bring the realm together. Or we all fall." He gripped Robb's arm tightly. "We need to go south." The wind grew warmer as they rode south, but Jon never stopped shivering. It wasn't the cold anymore. It was what he carried now, a piece of death still clinging to him, buried somewhere deep beneath his ribs. Sleep came in pieces. Memories returned in flashes. Blue eyes in the fire. A voice that whispered without sound. Something ancient had touched him in that explosion, and it had not let go. Robb rode beside him, his face as hard as the steel he wore. He hadn't smiled since the tower fell, and Jon knew whatever peace had begun to grow between them was fragile. Robb had forgiven the betrayal, but not forgotten it. Behind them, the last survivors of the wall followed, men of the Night's Watch, scarred wildlings, a handful of northern soldiers. No banners, no horns, just tired men on tired horses, riding into a world that didn't yet know it was dying. Their goal was simple: reach Winterfell, then White Harbor, then the South. Any lord who would listen, any ruler who would stop playing games and face the truth. But even before they reached Winterfell, they found resistance. At a river crossing near Last Hearth, they were stopped by a company of Bolton soldiers, grim men in red and black, under the command of a sneering captain who refused to believe a word they said. Dead men walking. He laughed. Is this what the bastards north of the wall have come to? Ghost stories? Jon stepped forward. I've seen them tear through walls thicker than this man's skull. If you don't let us pass, you're sentencing your people to death. But the captain just raised a crossbow. If you're so eager to meet death, Snow, I can send you ahead. Before he could blink, Ghost leapt from the shadows and ripped the man's throat out. The Boltons fled. Robb didn't stop them. There's no more time for patience, he said. When they finally rode through the gates of Winterfell, the people stared like they were seeing ghosts. Jon looked up at the familiar towers and stone, remembering the boy he once was. The stable hands, the old trees, the smell of wet earth, it all felt smaller now, distant. Sansa met them in the hall. She ran to Robb first, hugging him tightly, her face buried in his chest. Then she turned to Jon, eyes full of something between shock and sorrow. They said you were dead, she whispered. I was, Jon replied. But death doesn't seem to stick these days. The Stark bannermen gathered the next night, the Manderleys, the Glovers, the Serwyns. Robb stood before them with Jon at his side and told them the truth. Of the Night King, of the wall's fall, of the fire and ice that now moved against the south, but some didn't believe. Lord Glover slammed his fist on the table. You expect us to abandon our lands again? March south while our people starve? For what? More lies? They're not lies, Jon said. They're already marching south. If you wait, you won't have lands to defend. Let them come then, another said. Winterfell has stood for thousands of years. Jon's voice turned cold. And so did the wall. It's gone. Still, some refused. Fear was a slow poison. Pride even slower. But Sansa spoke then. She stood in front of them all. Her voice steady, strong. If we do nothing, we'll be remembered as the fools who buried the north while monsters marched over it. Silence followed. Then Lord Manderley stood. I'll follow the Wolf King and the Black Wolf. Let the south laugh at our ghosts. We'll be ready when theirs arrive. One by one, others followed. It wasn't all. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. 1 week later, the Stark host rode south, but the south was not ready. In King's Landing, Queen Cersei sat on her throne of lies, wine in hand, sneering at the letters from the north. Frozen corpses, wildlings and bastards. The north always sends monsters when they want attention. She tore the parchment in half and tossed it into the fire. In the Reach, Lord Tarly read the message and prepared his men in silence. In dawn, the letters were met with laughter, and then unease. But in Dragonstone, Queen Daenerys read the words twice, and then looked out toward the sea. Prepare the dragons, she said. The last night before they reached the Neck, Robb found Jon staring at the stars. They still look the same, Robb said. Jon nodded. Even when everything else changes. Robb sat beside him. We've lost too much, he said. Father, Mother, Rickon, the wall. Jon didn't reply at first. Then he said quietly, we might lose more. Robb turned to him. You were right. About everything. I wasn't right, Jon said. I was desperate. Still, you saved us, even when I hated you for it. Jon looked at his brother. Then hate me again. Just don't stop fighting. Robb smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Never. The two brothers sat in silence as the cold wind blew, and far to the north, beyond the ruins of the wall, the snow began to move again. The dead weren't finished, they were just getting started.